Okay. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Today, we're going to talk about starting a new conservation commission. You've already passed your first test, and that's joining the webinar this morning on Microsoft Teams. As I'm sure you've already noticed, on the toolbar for Microsoft Teams, there's a way of turning your video off as well as your microphone. We do ask that you keep your microphone muted during the course of the webinar. And and you can choose whether to have your video on or off. We do have a meeting chat for right now. If you would please just enter your name and town or organization as a way of introducing yourself, that would be great. We'll be using the chat throughout this morning's webinar. Andy will use it to post links relevant to the presentation as we're going. And you can use it to ask questions while the presenter is speaking. We'll be taking several different breaks over the course of the webinar to answer questions. And at that time, we'll read what's in the chat, and you'll also have an opportunity to unmute your mic. The topic for this morning is broken up into these parts. And so first, we just want to talk a little bit about what is a conservation commission? And then tackle, well, how do you get one started? What are the steps involved there? And then we'll do a section on what the basic work of a conservation commission and typical tasks that a CC engages in. And then Andy will finish off the presentation by looking at the work of the Conservation Commission in the larger context of municipal planning. Before I get too far along, I want to tell you a little bit about where we're coming from. Andy and I worked for the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and we believe in the conservation of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont. This is a huge mission. It takes us into a lot of different types of conservation, from individual species of fish, wildlife, or invertebrates and plants, to habitats and natural communities. We conserve at a variety of different scales. The work of the department also involves a variety of different constituencies. And while yes, hunters, anglers, trappers, landowners are certainly part of that core constituency, we also take very seriously our mission to serve future generations and whole communities as well as wildlife watchers and recreationists of all kinds. That work with the communities is of particular importance to Andy and I. We serve as the department's community wildlife program. We provide technical assistance to all 251 Vermont towns, all the conservation commissions and planning commissions in the state, as well as the non-governmental organizations and regional planning commissions. Our work is sometimes it's presentations and workshops, sometimes it's behind the scenes support for planning and providing that technical assistance, and sometimes it's support for conservation work out in the field. Whatever it is that your commission is involved in, please don't hesitate to call us and we're happy to help. This morning's topic about starting a conservation commission is part of a three-part nuts and bolts series that the department is hosting with the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. The idea here is that first, you want to assemble your team, get the Conservation Commission together and working together effectively. Then you want to know a little bit more about what it is that your ecological priorities are. And we recommend conducting a natural resource inventory to understand that ecological context. As your commission becomes more advanced, we suggest working to start a conservation fund as a way of working with partners to actually pay for conservation. All three of these sessions are recorded and available to you both through the department's webpage as well as ABCCC. That's the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. Okay, so the first question here is, what is a conservation commission anyway? And it's a citizen advisory board whose purpose is to promote stewardship of natural and cultural resources in the community. So first thing, it's an advisory board. It doesn't have that much power, but it has a broad mandate. And the next piece is that it handles both natural and cultural resources. What I show on screen are some photos from Montpelier's BioBlitz that was hosted in part by the Montpelier Conservation Commission. Just as an example of the sort of exciting work that conservation commissions can bring about in a town. That educational piece of teaching kids and adults in town more about the natural resources, as well as that functional piece of having an inventory and bringing that all together in the town planning process. Montpelier's BioBlitz is a great example of the kind of work that a conservation commission can get engaged in. So why bother? And I think the basic reason is that CCs really make a difference. A lot of times, starting a conservation commission can help show that caring and community in our towns, and bring about those people who care and want to engender that community. Conservation commissions are good for bringing about action in town and making things happen. Volunteers that make things happen join the Conservation Commission. I think conservation commissions are also important for thinking about big picture ideas, the larger context, ecological context in a town, and how that might affect the way the town does business, as well as specific threats. The Richmond Conservation Commission was begun in 1987 in response to a proposal to expand the gas station there in Richmond into a major truck stop between Montreal and New York. And so sometimes those commissions begin in response to a specific threat, but then take on the larger understanding of ecological issues. So examples of CC work are the Natural Resource District, the Natural Resource Overlay District in Jericho that we'll talk more about, or stewardship activities, trail management activities there in Bradford, or the conservation easements that have been done in Greensboro with the Greensboro Conservation Commission and Land Trust. So there's a lot of exciting work that CCs can do to make a difference in every Vermont town. So I said this was in partnership with the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. And that group exists to empower conservation commissions across the state and to help start new conservation commissions. Currently, about half of Vermont towns have a conservation commission or something that's equivalent. ABCCC exists to empower those communities. And really, there are four key elements of ABCCC's work. The first is networking. ABCC hosts regional meetings of conservation commissions to bring together the folks that are on the ground doing the work and to learn from what each other's doing. Part of this networking also happens at our annual summit, where we bring conservation commissions from across the state together. And at that summit, there are a variety of sessions, background education on some of the emerging science, the nuts and bolts track on things like CC leadership or strategic planning. And then there's a theme each year for that summit. It's really a great opportunity to learn more and network with the community. But ABCC also has a tiny grants program with a May 1st deadline, incidentally, and hosts a library of conservation success stories. That's the good news of conservation in Vermont. So I encourage you to go to the ABCC website and learn more about these resources. Okay, so we're in this section of starting a conservation commission, and certainly learning from ABCC is one of the ways of doing that. ABCC also has a listserv that I would recommend as a great first step in starting a CC, where you can learn more from others who've already done that work. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to the powers and duties of a CC. What's actually in statute? What are CCs allowed to do? And the first, maybe the most important word in the legal mumbo jumbo that I'm about to share with you is this word may. Any conservation commission created under this chapter may. It doesn't say should, it says may. So that allows for a huge range of activities, but doesn't allow for a particular set of power within the context of the municipal government. Okay, so the first thing is inventory, and those are natural and cultural resources. And so here we're talking about concepts like air, surface water, soils, minerals, streams, scenic and recreational resources, plant and animal life, agricultural lands, forest lands, other open lands, lands with historic, educational, cultural, scientific, architectural, or archaeological values. So there's a whole range of natural and cultural resources that we can inventory. And that inventory work is never actually going to be done. We're always going to have more things to inventory or more that we want to learn about what it is that we have. The next piece of the powers and duties in statute has to do with receiving money and recommending the purchase of land. And so the Conservation Commission can receive gifts of land or other property with select board approval. And so there are a variety of different ways, that the CC can recommend the purchase or receipt of land. They can receive money from the town budget for operating expenses. They can receive money from any source, and they can receive those gifts of land or other property. The other piece here is steward town-owned lands. A lot of conservation commissions do maintain town-owned lands, particularly town forests, and some are engaged very actively in that kind of work with trail building and boardwalk building and managing those recreational impacts. Another piece here is advising the Planning Commission or the DRB on development review. There are only a handful of CCs in Vermont that do development review. It's a very technical process, but it's certainly it's certainly something that CCs can engage in, but you really need a high level of capacity to pull that off. But all conservation commissions can work to advise the planning commissions on natural resources and local environmental issues. I'd say this is one of the most important tasks of the Conservation Commission, and that relationship with the Planning Commission is hugely important. Here's a place where the CC can get involved in the town planning process, and Andy will talk more about that in the last section today. So also in this powers and duties piece of what is a Conservation Commission, those educational activities. And that Montpelier BioBlitz example was a good one here. Regardless of what the town may be engaged in terms of heading towards non-regulatory tools or regulatory tools, the educational work that the CC can be engaged in to support those tools is hugely important. And so the Walks and Talks series or the speaker series, whatever it is that CCs get engaged in for education are really hugely important. And then the last thing here is the annual report and the responsibility to report out to the town on what the CC has been doing, how they've spent town money, and what sort of activities they've engaged in. Okay, so that's the first section on what is a Conservation Commission. Any questions in the chat, or does anyone want to unmute their microphone and ask the question directly? Andy?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on, but please don't hesitate to type your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them at the next break. Okay, so that first section was what is a Conservation Commission, and now we're going to move into how to start a Conservation Commission. So in terms of proposing one, I'd say the first idea is to get a core group together and talk with other residents, figure out who's interested, get a group of people together that want to advise on these sorts of issues. Then approach the Planning Commission and see what their level of interest is. Would this be helpful to the Planning Commission to have another municipal commission that might advise on natural resource issues? And so you would start by taking their temperature. Then you would go to the Select Board and you would determine the level of support from the Select Board. You would mention that you have the buy-in or not of the Planning Commission. And if the Select Board supports it, you'd ask for the creation of a ballot item to be voted on at town meeting. And if the Select Board doesn't support this first proposal, then you could organize a petition and get that item on the ballot. So there's a way of having that led by the citizens or more led by the Select Board. So after that, you would hold an informational meeting. You could certainly invite a neighboring conservation commissions or an ABCC board member. And so that informational meeting would bring those interested parties together and would allow you to set up your strategy, whether you're seeking that ballot item or seeking that petition as a way of moving this forward. And so you would have that action plan at that first informational meeting on how to create this commission. So here's a sample article for that townwide vote, and here it is for Charlotte. Article number blank blank to see if the town will vote to create a municipal conservation commission pursuant to Title 24 Vermont Statutes Online. The town of Charlotte. This was the town of Charlotte's article for 1989. And then specifically, they say, will the town vote to establish a conservation commission under that authority for the purposes of maintaining an inventory of the town's natural resources, receiving gifts of land for conservation purposes, assisting the Planning Commission on natural resource issues, and promoting public understanding of local natural resources. So in this sample article, they get at the major tasks that the Conservation Commission is going to be doing there in Charlotte. That idea of inventory, that idea of receiving gifts of land for conservation purposes, that idea of advising the Planning Commission, and that educational idea. So when you have this kernel of an idea, you're trying to get the word out to people. And how do you do that? And I just want to encourage you to plan some publicity to educate townspeople on what a conservation commission does and encourage them to vote. So you could certainly use web and email. A lot of towns have Front Porch Forum. A lot of towns have their own listservs. You can use old media like a town newspaper or a local newspaper. You could hold webinars, you can hold focus groups, just talking to people, talking it up that we're going to do these sorts of, that we're going to get this commission. And then hands-on activities, whatever you can do to get the word out, to get people to understand what a commission does and to encourage them to vote for its creation. Another sort of way of getting this off the ground is to understand what your community network looks like. So who's connected to who? What are the different groups in your town? How do you effectively reach out to all those different groups to get support for this idea of starting a conservation commission? I have this old school phone picture up on this slide to remind myself to remind you all that it's not just about email or these new media, that just talking to people and sometimes picking up the phone and talking to people directly can be the best way to get an idea like starting a CC to take hold in your community. So the next piece here is if the Conservation Commission is approved by the Select Board and then at the town meeting day, either on the ballot or because of the petition, the next step is that the Select Board would appoint the members. And the mix of membership is critical to the success of the Conservation Commission. So yes, the Select Board appoints the members, but usually they appoint them from this core group that started the idea of the Conservation Commission. And so having a balance among the members that the Select Board approves is very important. All of them have to be residents of the municipality. They have to be at least 18 years old, but we're going to strongly recommend that you also include youth members. The terms are not less than they're a total membership of not less than 3 nor more than 9 members, and it's a 4-year term. And if somebody leaves early, then the appointment would be to fill that vacancy just for that unexpired term. But again, the mix of members is very important. And so having people that are networkers, that know who's who in town, that can get the word out, that's part of it. Having people who understand the science and can explain that science is part of it. Having people with technical skills like grant writing is part of it. So just understanding the mix of members, I think, is an important step here. Also understanding what makes people want to engage is really important, and making sure that your commission is set up to provide these opportunities. So people want to make a difference. They want to know that their efforts aren't wasted, and they want to be a part of something successful, but they don't want it to be an ill-defined amount of time. So if you say, would you join the commission? It's 1 meeting per month, 2 hours, plus 2 hours of prep time each month. That's a very discrete set of time that you're looking for people, and a very discrete commitment. As opposed to saying, we want you to be part of this thing, and it could be hundreds of hours or it could be 4. That makes people a little bit more hesitant to engage. People want to see those concrete results. They want to be a part of a successful enterprise. And so the extent to which the commission can guarantee success by chunking things up into small bits and holding each other accountable for achieving those goals it makes for a more effective commission, and hence makes people more likely to engage. Lastly, I'll just add that people want to forge relationships. They want to meet other people in their town, and they want to learn and be challenged. But we really need to be clear on what exactly we're asking, and are we setting up our commission in a way to maximize volunteer efforts. Now, I talked a little bit about the statute before, but I just wanted to remind everyone here that a conservation commission is part of town government. It has to have agreed upon rules. Those meetings have to be open to the public. I'm going to talk about the open meeting law during the next section, and those meetings need to be recorded in minutes as part of the public record. So this is all part of starting that CC, is understanding that you're part of municipal government and that you have to do certain things to be part of the government. Last piece here in terms of starting a CC, or one of the last pieces, is understanding how different every community is. I really like showing this because it talks about the ingredients in the recipe that is a community. And so one of the ingredients here is the build capital, the buildings, the infrastructure, the equipment, all the things, the human-made material that a town has. But another part of a community, another one of the ingredients, are the human skills and the abilities, the education, the connectivity, how connected the neighbors are, how well they communicate, the family, the neighbors, the government. That sort of social capital piece is another ingredient of a community. And lastly, there's natural capital. And we can talk about natural resources that continue to be available to us, as well as ecosystem services, or even some of those intangibles, like beauty of nature. So I bring up this list of ingredients in a community because each recipe, each community is a little different. And has a different mix. Some of the wealthier communities might have a great deal of infrastructure or equipment that they can bring to bear on a problem. Some communities really have to rely more on the whole human and social capital. So understanding what your community is and what mix of ingredients it has can be really helpful in determining the trajectory of your conservation commission. How are you going to solve problems? Are you a town that has some money to be able to just hire consultants to make that happen? Or are you going to need to solve problems more with your human capital by throwing volunteer efforts at problems as a way of solving them? So this understanding of the community can be a really helpful ingredient in getting your conservation commission to work effectively. I'd say you need to start with a celebration, and really, no matter what you're doing in terms of getting the CC off the ground, celebration is key, and making sure that your events are take on this celebratory tone is really important. And so whether you're starting with guided tours or outings, a walks and talks series, events, photo contests, it's really okay to have fun in the work of the commission. You're going to be more effective the more fun you have and the more fun people who participate in your events are having. So a couple examples on the screen. Here's a float that we did in Richmond down the Winooski River with a naturalist on board to celebrate the natural resources there in town. Here's a Forest for the Birds talk that a Conservation Commission hosted with Audubon. There are all sorts of great celebratory events that we can talk about that Conservation Commissions have engaged in to really celebrate their natural resources. I want to remind us all that we need to meet people where they are. And so a lot of times, if we have an environmental issue that the Conservation Commission is working on, and we want to get the word out, it's not enough to have our own events. We often, as Conservation Commission members, need to go to where other people are. In Sharon, it's Dump and Donuts on a Saturday morning. That's the best way to meet landowners who are taking care of business at the town dump in the morning. The Sharon Conservation Commission offered donuts and set up a table and talked to townspeople as they were engaged in that activity. In Craftsbury, it's going to the general store at 6 a.m. when the commuters are leaving town. In the Mad River Valley, it's going to the farmers markets and showing maps of Waitsfield and Warren from the inventory and making a few points. We need to attend these other groups' existing meetings and events and as a way of working forward on these town issues. So we need to host more exciting events as part of a Conservation Commission business, and we need to meet people where they are at their events and their activities. All right, so that second section. So first we hit what is a Conservation Commission, then we hit how do you start a Conservation Commission. Any comments, questions, or thoughts from that second section?
Barbara had a question. Barbara, go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask it straight to Jens.
Okay. Yeah, hi Jens. I can definitely see the value of going to the ballot to set up one of these commissions. To get interest started and maybe get people involved and maybe signed up at that point. But is there another way for the select board to set up a commission? Can they just do it themselves?
I believe it has to be a vote from the town, and so whether it's done by as a ballot item or as a referendum, I think either way the town has to vote. I don't know that. I think the select board has and I'm no lawyer. We should ask the league on this for final clarification. But I believe the select board would have the authority to start an ad hoc committee, like a conservation committee. But the commission would need to happen by townwide vote.
Okay. And do the votes usually? Okay. Do the votes usually go pretty well?
It depends on the town, really, and how much work has been done.
Mm.
I mean, okay. It's really all over the place. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question from Mary Beth in the chat. Mary Beth is on the Planning Commission for Rutland Town and we're considering starting a Conservation Commission. We don't have zoning or a town planner. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations of examples of other towns in this situation?
Yeah, there are many towns with conservation commissions that don't have town planners or zoning. And conservation commissions in that sort of environment can play a really crucial role with education. Oftentimes it's those non-regulatory tools that are most important in those sorts of settings. And the Conservation Commission can be a really ideal messenger for some of those non-regulatory tools. So I think that can absolutely work. You don't have to have a regulatory framework like zoning in effect to have a successful Conservation Commission.
That's everything in the chat. Oh, excuse me. Kevin's writing in. Can you explain a little further the mechanism of a Conservation Commission receiving land? Is that on behalf of the town? That sounds like a land trust type of function.
Yes. A land trust in particular would put an easement on that land. And whereas town-owned land doesn't have to have an easement on it. So a conservation easement would spell out the purposes of that land and would limit the development rights. Whereas a municipality can accept land and doesn't have to limit those development rights, though they might choose to do that in the case of a town forest, for example, where you could have town-owned land and put an easement on it. So certainly the work is similar in that it's about accepting land and understanding how to manage that land into the future. But the town could choose to put an easement on town-owned land or choose not to put an easement on that. Does that help, Kevin? Feel free to unmute your mic if you need any follow-up.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to move on. I've got one more section that I want to handle before we turn this over to Andy, and that's this idea of the CC work. What does a CC do? What are some of the options? Andy and I work with all 251 towns. We've worked with just about every conservation commission in the state. And so here's our opportunity to provide you with some examples of what we've seen out there. And I've mentioned this before, but outreach and education. The work of a conservation commission is about dealing with people and partnerships. And so, as I spoke to at the beginning, creating events that are exciting. In the middle here is a competition on building wildlife overpasses, models of wildlife overpasses that a commission engaged in with some local schools. Here's a talk by Sue Morris on deer of North America. Here's that cultural history tour. So the education and outreach function of that a CC can engage in is incredibly important. And again, it doesn't matter if the town is headed in more of a regulatory or a non-regulatory direction. The educational work is critically important to support whatever direction that is. Now, I spoke to inventory and the importance of inventory, and we have a whole separate webinar on inventory. But I wanted to put the plug in here that a town-based natural resource inventory, particularly with natural community mapping, in my opinion, is the most important scale for inventory information for a conservation commission to work with. And so there's all manner of statewide data, and there's actionable information in that statewide data. And Andy and I help towns all the time use that data for moving forward. But the level of detail in a town-wide inventory can help you take your planning and regulatory framework to the next level. And so I really want to stress how important inventory is somewhere down the line in your conservation commission work. I'd also mentioned conservation funds, and having that ability to buy land or recommend the purchase of land for the town is really important. Most conservation funds don't produce enough money to buy land outright. they produce enough money to leverage funds, to work with other conservation organizations like the Vermont Land Trust or the Trust for Public Land. And so those reserve funds often show that local match, that local investment in conservation. But those reserve funds can be used for a whole host of conservation-related activity. And I stress the land purchase, but they could be used for restoration or management plans or outdoor education or inventories. So there's all sorts of ways that a town could spend that conservation reserve fund. So I'll certainly recommend that you take a look at our webinar on this topic as well. Andy did a fantastic job with it. So an important part of the work of a conservation commission is understanding who does what. How is your town set up? What are the different roles and responsibilities? We just talked about Rutland Town with not having a town manager, not having zoning, but having that planning commission. Maybe thinking about starting a conservation commission. So it's important for CCs and everyone in town government to know what the lay of the land is with these different roles and responsibilities. It helps each municipal group stay in their lane, not step on other people's toes, but it also helps you figure out who to go to for help. The relationship between the Conservation Commission and the Planning Commission is critically important, but all of these relationships are really important, and they need to be relationships of trust. And so the work of a Conservation Commission, particularly a young Conservation Commission, is one of building trust. Trust that other commissions trust that your commission is working effectively on behalf of the people, and the trust of the townspeople that your commission is working effectively on their behalf. And so understanding these roles and responsibilities is a key piece of building that trust. Now, there's a whole range of conservation activities, and some towns are going to head more towards a non-regulatory end of things, and some towns are going to head more towards a regulatory end of things. And there's a whole spectrum there, and there's a whole suite of tools we can choose from. And the conservation community needs to understand that no one tool is going to be right for every town, and that we need to think about these suites of tools and using a whole suite of tools together. And so there's an educational component as well as other components in whatever direction the CC is heading. Another important piece of the work of a conservation commission is understanding community values. I highly recommend this activity for particularly new CCs. Again, to build trust on the part of the townspeople that you are operating in their best interest. And this activity is essentially getting as many people together from town as you possibly can and doing a community values mapping activity. You ask one question: what do you love about living here? The example on screen is from Cornwall, and they did this activity in the school with the 1st through 5th grades the week before, and then with the whole town the next week. And we're able to really get a tremendous group of people together to say, here's what we care about where. And we made maps. We combined all the small groups into these separate value groups and across all the small groups. And so we were able to show one value at a time, how all of these different values add up together. And then we were able to overlap the value groups to show this heat map. And so that's where there are more value groups present on the same spot at the same time. And so this is a tremendous way of helping the town move forward with not only what people care about, but what people care about where. And it allows the Conservation Commission to identify potential allies in conservation, whether we're talking about recreational allies or hunting and fishing or scenic interests, whatever it might be. Another hugely important part of the work of a CC is understanding the science, and tools like Vermont Conservation Design that's available to you on the BioFinder website are a critically important prioritization tool. They show you the statewide priorities of lands and waters in Vermont that are most important. And you can mix that high ecological value with your understanding of high community value to create these areas of high public value. And so those are resources that you can map, you can put in your planning documents, showing, here's where there's the most ecological value, and here's where there's incredible community interest. And together we think these are areas of high public value. So this prioritization of natural resources piece and putting it in the context of community values is really important work of a conservation commission. Okay, I said you have to do an annual report to the municipality to explain finances and transactions. This is all part of being transparent as a municipal commission. And then I just wanted to take quickly, look at the open meeting law for take a few slides on this because it's such an important topic. And just wanted to focus everyone's attention that, the open meeting law is really designed to include all the townspeople in the work of the municipality. And so municipal commission members should discuss business and take actions only in open meetings. And when people can hear what decisions are being made and how that municipal group is moving forward. So there are a variety of parts to this law. It applies to every group, no matter the size. And so every group has to be transparent about what it's doing and how it's doing it and make sure those meetings are open to the public. There are limits on this. This doesn't allow the public to sit at a public official's desk, as it were, and watch them conduct town business. It doesn't go that far, but it does allow for greater transparency in what's happening with each of these boards. So this law applies anytime there's a quorum of members. So there's a majority of members. So, members need to be very careful at social functions, for example, that you're not talking about or deciding municipal business. It can actually get kind of tricky when there may be 2 or 3 members of commission that just happen to be together at a town event. If they start talking too much, that could be construed as a majority of members meeting and get you into trouble. So you really shouldn't be talking about town business at social events. The way that a lot of conservation commissions do operate is by specifically tasking subgroups, working groups, to handle individual items in between the monthly meetings. So it would be illegal against the open meeting law to have a majority of members meet outside of the regular meeting. But a subcommittee that's tasked with a very specific task can meet outside of those regular meetings and do that business that they were specifically tasked by the commission to do, and then at the next meeting go back and report on their activities. So that's a way of moving the work of the Conservation Commission forward in between the regularly warned meetings of the members. I'll just, one little tidbit is that there's temporary authority for public bodies to meet electronically. This is Act 92 during COVID-19. It remains to be seen what will happen with this temporary authority into the future and what direction our public meetings will take post-COVID. Okay, so that's that third section of the work of a CC. Any comments, questions, thoughts on this section?
Let's start with Paul. We had a question in the last section.
Paul, yeah. I'm sorry, I got here a little late. I'm just wondering, I've been on the Planning Commission, the Conservation Commission for a while, and I'm just wondering what you think is a good relationship between, or what should the relationship be between the Conservation Commission and the Planning Commission? we haven't ever met with them. Would you advise doing that every once in a while, or can you advise on that?
I would, and Andy, I'm just making it so you can switch over. I would certainly advise meeting with your PC. Once a year sort of joint meeting, I think could be a great way of doing it. Some communities will have an individual who serves on both commissions as a way of ensuring communication and transparency. That is really time consuming, but is a great way of making sure you're on the same page. It's really one of, that relationship needs to be one of trust. So the more FaceTime you get with each other, the more trust there's going to be. And so that will allow the Planning Commission to, say, for example, task the CC with writing the natural resource section of the town plan or whatever it might be. So that relationship of trust is a really important one.
Okay, thank you.
Madeline, did you have your hand up? Go ahead. Unmute yourself.
I did. Thank you. I'm curious, in that town that created the values map, do you know any more detail about how they surveyed people, whether it was an open-ended survey or whether there were a selection of values for the community to choose from?
Yep, Madeline, we hosted that values mapping forum, and we've been hosting those values mapping forums for towns across the state. So we know exactly how that was done. And that was Cornwall, that example, but we've done this in numerous towns. And there are no sideboards. We just say, what do you love about living here? And respondents use the base map to draw circles on places they care about for any reason. Then we are the ones who take all of those open-ended values and put them into the different value groups that I showed you. And then I'm the one who digitizes those and takes those value groups and overlaps them. So there's a lot to say about values mapping, and I'm happy to, we're happy to help your town with that. But we could get way into the weeds on that and do several webinars just on that piece. Anything else in terms of comments or questions before we move on? All right, Andy, over to you to wrap this up.
All right, can you see my slide, Jens?
Sure can.
Okay. So thanks, Jens, for giving us that digest on starting a conservation commission. I'm going to spend about the next 8 minutes here taking you into the world of planning. So I'll do my best to cover what I can with the time we have. You know, many of us are drawn to the work of conservation because of our own personal interests in the natural world. And yet, as you get more involved in town government, we want you to be thinking about resources beyond the natural world. You know, to be a town, you need to engage in this concept of a whole community. And that means thinking about topics like transportation, housing, cultivating a vibrant downtown with growth, having public facilities and educational opportunities. You know, there's just a host of things that towns need to deal with. And as the Conservation Commission, you can bring a really important perspective to many of those issues and you know, really contribute to these larger questions of how do you keep a community healthy and vital. You know, much of that complexity begins to come together in the town planning process. So in Vermont, towns are granted the authority to plan by the state. And every 8 years, there's an opportunity to revise this document, which is the town's vision for the future. Now, it used to be it was a 5-year document. Now it's an 8-year document. But this gives you an opportunity to balance many of those different interests and perspectives happening in your community and really, you know, plan out what you want your town to look like in the future. So this is a good place to bring in feedback, such as through that community values exercise Jens was explaining. And it also sets the stage for other important town standards, such as zoning, if that's something your community has or intends to implement. Now, there's a lot to be said about town planning, and there are many other experts who we'd be happy to put you in touch with. But essentially, the framework for planning is built around a local process, and that includes much of the development review. Now, what we've learned from some investigations by colleagues is that only 2 to 4% of subdivision projects actually trigger Act 250, that larger state development review process. The reality is most of that review, isn't triggering the process, and if there is any review, it's got to happen at the local level. And so really what this means is that each of Vermont's towns has an outsized role in determining the future of Vermont's landscape. I'll just briefly mention that there's a great resource available from the state, the Municipal Plan State Planning Manual. Jens is going to put a link to that in the chat, but it's got a lot of great information about process and how you go about creating a high quality plan. Planning is an exercise that's forward looking. And in the town plan, much of this comes together in the narrative text that you put together. But there are also opportunities to create maps that will help guide future natural resource use and future land use. So when we look at the town plans from a natural resources perspective, often we're drawn to the natural resources map, which lays out what the known ecological resources in a community are. But we also look really closely at maps like the zoning district map, which really spells out what the different zones are and what kinds of growth are permitted in those zones. And then we also compare that to the proposed land use map. And in some cases, we find some interesting relationships, such as here in Newfane. What we noted here is that there's a little bit of a disconnect between this northern part of the town and the proposed land use map as compared to the zoning district map. So from our perspective, there are opportunities to really sync these resources together and make sure that the vision we've laid out in the plan will actually have a better chance of coming true through the standards and processes that we set up at the town level. So this is something that, if Newfane wants to engage with us, we can provide feedback on how to use what we know about the natural resources to make this a better town plan and map set. Oh, sorry about that. I just skipped ahead a few slides. Unfortunately, if we don't engage in planning, the end result is sprawl. And I haven't met anybody who's psyched about sprawl here in Vermont. But we have different kinds of sprawl out in the universe. Some of it's urban, but a lot of it here in Vermont is rural. And when that's left unchecked, we end up with development in inconvenient places that can be damaging to our natural resources and end up costing our towns more money and services. So we just need to be careful about how we communicate that vision for the future. Many people are moving to Vermont to sort of fulfill a particular vision, and sometimes that vision is a single house at the end of a long driveway tucked away in the woods. And that's problematic. So that's something as communities we can begin to think about, how do we present our community and how do we attract people here and do so without detrimental effects on our resources. So as you engage in planning from your seat on the Conservation Commission, just know that there are a lot of resources out there. Vermont has 11 regional planning commissions that serve districts made up of member towns, and they're one of the premier deliverers of technical assistance. They often have expertise in some of the nitty-gritty of zoning and subdivision processes. And they also maintain data such as GIS data relating to different resources. These regional planning commissions also write a regional plan. It's more focused on the region, but you know, we do want to make sure that the town plans agree in their overall vision with the regional plans. So they're planning at a different scale. That's something to be aware of, but they can be a great asset to your local efforts. One final piece of existing planning that we want every conservation commission in the state to know about is Act 171. This is an act from 2016 that's sometimes referred to as the Forest Integrity Bill, and it requires that town and regional plans adopted after January 1st, 2018, it requires that they identify forest blocks and habitat connectors and plan for land development so as to minimize forest fragmentation of those resources. So this is one of the ways that we're really looking to address forest fragmentation head on. And just know that there is an official guidance document issued by our Agency of Natural Resources. And both Jens and I work closely with towns to help them navigate this new requirement and do so in a exciting and productive way. So if you're engaged in that process, please do reach out. We're very happy to you know, make that a smoother thing for you. All right, just a final couple notes here. There are, as I said, many resources out there. 3 of those that our department works closely on are the Conserving Vermont's Natural Heritage. This is a great framework guidebook for getting a handle on different resources and how to protect them. We also produce the Mapping Vermont's Natural Heritage Guidebook. This really gets you into the world of conservation planning from a data and a mapping perspective. And our partners over at the Vermont Natural Resources Council have a Community Strategies for Vermont's Forest and Wildlife Guidebook. And this goes through many of the tools and techniques you can use as a town to protect forests and wildlife. And I believe that they are actually working on producing a new edition. So that'll be an exciting resource coming out in the near future. As Jens alluded to earlier in the presentation, we're often doing webinars and trainings. This is kind of the tail end of our spring series, but I did want to point out that we can make recordings of those webinars to you. We've got one on starting a town conservation fund, natural resources inventories, and then we offer these 2 more in-depth trainings for municipal officials. The first one is focused on ecology and the environment, with a little bit of you know, planning material in there. And then the second course is you know, how do you take action in your community? So these are great resources. We recommend that every municipal commission in the state try to at least send somebody or send multiple people to those. And finally, if you want to know what we're up to and what we have planned for educational opportunities, you can visit this webpage to see what our current batch of listings are. A parting note here, we just want to make folks aware that the majority of conservation is paid for by hunters and anglers. So if you're interested in supporting the conservation work that we do and others do here in Vermont, 2 useful ways to do that is to purchase a habitat stamp. This is like a sticker you can put on your car, but that goes towards funding habitat enhancement projects across the state. And the non-game wildlife fund is another opportunity. It's still tax season, so there's a box you can check to channel a portion of your refund to help non-game species. And with that, I apologize, I'm a couple minutes over. I just wanted to put our emails here so that you know how to get in touch with us. Please do reach out. We really enjoy working with folks, and we're always happy to meet you where you're at and help you advance your conservation goals. So with that, I will end, and I'm happy to field questions here.
Andy, Paul wrote in the chat that Braintree has the possibility of gaining a town forest and was looking for suggestions on ways that the Braintree Conservation Commission could help in the process. I offered a separate meeting to talk about the Braintree situation in particular, But do you have any general ideas on ways that a CC can help with that sort of process?
I think that's a great idea to talk separately and kind of get into the specifics there. But kind of more generally speaking, one of the things that a conservation commission can do is, really get a handle on what the ecological value of those properties might be. Folks are going to have a lot of different ideas about what should happen in the town forest, and the Conservation Commission can be a voice advocating for the different resources that are there, and suggesting that which activities may or may not be appropriate in particular parts of the forest. But yeah, lots to say there, and Paul, we'd be happy to chat separately.
Great. And then Mary Beth wrote with some thanks and said that she'd likely be reaching out in the future with more questions. And Paul, we have your email, so we'll email you right after this meeting to set something up.
Great. And I see Madeline has a hand up. Did you have a question?
I think that's been up for a while.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody so much. It's a pleasure to spend this hour with you. Thanks for sticking with us a couple minutes past. And as I said, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you, and have a great day.